Hello everyone, this is Major Green, also known as Nitpicking Nerd, and today I want to talk about the weapons in Star Wars. And specifically how come the advanced space weapons, the energy weapons, seem to behave like ancient cannons. Specifically in all the shots with the Supremacy, Snoke's ship, they fire these laser or plasma bolts, and they seem to arc in space. They seem to be falling downwards, so they're being shot as if they're actually heavy cannons falling down. So how can we explain that? So first of all the weapons in Star Wars have always been kind of symbolizing ancient weapons on Earth. Even the lightsaber basically represents a sword of ancient times, and so it always was kind of fishy. It always was a bit strange. How come if they have these lasers, why can't they simply shoot their enemies? So why does the laser is so limited that it can only be used as a sword? So it was always a bit silly. It's actually one of the reasons I didn't like Star Wars when I first saw it as a kid. I thought a lot of it is silly. It's like a fantasy movie pretending to be a science fiction movie, masquerading as science fiction while basically being a fantasy about wizards and knights and all that kind of stuff. Later on I did kind of accept the lightsaber when it became obvious it's part of the whole Jedi thing. So because they have precognition and they can use the lightsaber to block or deflect shots fired at them, and it can also cut through anything, so I kind of accepted that later on as something plausible. And also I imagine it's not really a laser, even though it's referred as a laser sword. I imagine it's some sort of energy or plasma which is contained inside the force field, and the force field is actually what is deflecting shots fired at it, and it only allows matter to pass through, and that's how the lightsaber can cut through things. It basically heats up things which pass through its force field. So this force field allows physical matter to pass through, but it doesn't allow any energy weapons, and it deflects them, and that's how it contains the energy of the lightsaber inside it as well. So it can be plasma or photons or whatever, it doesn't matter. So I kind of made up an explanation in my head, and that's how I accepted the lightsaber. And later on, all the weapons in Star Wars were always seemed kind of like ancient weapons. In episode 1 they use those catapults and some of the cannons. We saw, I think in episode 3, we saw the cannons on the ship behaving like cannons on pirate ships. Kind of pushing back, and you have someone sitting there, and you even see droids sitting inside the cannon to target it, which is kind of silly. How come they can't use a computer? I guess the reason for that is something I mentioned before. Maybe it's been done this way so that it cannot be hacked by the enemy ship. If it's all computers, they can be easily hacked, and that's why they rely on actually old style targeting system. So you need a person or a droid without a Wi-Fi, I guess, to target it, simply so that it cannot be hacked. So we have all these fighters who fly around and shoot almost like the airplanes of all the wars on Earth. So it's basically all a deliberate stylistic choice, so I can accept that. And some people would tell me it's just a movie, why are you nitpicking it so much? Because it's fun. I just love to nitpick, and I love to make up excuses to explain it in a science fiction kind of way, because I am more of a science geek, and so I enjoy trying to figure it out scientifically and to make up excuses for it, to justify it as a science fiction as well. Because why not? Why can't it be some science fiction also? Why not have the science fiction portion also makes sense? And so if I can come up with excuses, then why not? So when we saw cannons on these ships, they seem to behave not like energy weapons, they seem to behave like actual physical cannons. So you see them getting pushed back, and you even see like shells coming out and stuff like that. So we can presume that all these shots are not actually lasers, but some kind of physical projectile. And we can also presume that from the speed of these bolts. Even the blasters, the hand blasters, when someone fires one, you can see the bolt flying. If it was actually a laser, it would travel the speed of light, and it would be invisible and so on. So it's not actually a laser, even if it's called that. I guess it's more like a plasma bolt or something else. Maybe lasers are ineffective in this universe. Maybe they have shields against lasers. Maybe the stormtrooper armor is actually effective against some weapons, and that's why no one uses them. So maybe that's why they keep wearing it, to make sure no one can use the simpler weapons. And the blasters we see are not lasers, it's actually some sort of plasma bolts or something like that. And maybe because of that they lose energy with distance. So since it's a plasma, it's basically superheated gas, and so it probably loses its mass or energy as it's traveling. So the more the distance, the less energy it has, and this can explain how come these shots seem to be more effective close by, but not so effective in longer distance. And the same, I guess, can be said about some of these space weapons. And this might explain how come when a ship is far enough, then these weapons are no longer effective against its shields. And maybe that's why all these ships in Star Wars have to fight so close to each other. Except it being more visually fun, maybe we have an actual explanation here. And as for why the shots are arching in The Last Jedi, first of all, it's not the first time we saw that in Star Wars. We actually saw the same kind of thing in the Clone Wars cartoon. We saw supposedly energy plasma cannons firing at a city which is shielded, and the shots seem to be falling down. So maybe they contain some kind of a physical shell, they contain some kind of heavy object which might be generating this plasma bolt around it, just like a lightsaber is generating this plasma or whatever. So maybe these cannons actually fire some kind of physical object which is releasing all this energy. And so gravity is affecting this object, and that's why it's falling down. Now back to The Last Jedi. Here there is no gravity, there is no planet below them in all these scenes of the space chase, so how come these bolts are falling down? Maybe this whole chase scene was taking place next to a supergiant black hole which was below them, and this might actually explain a lot of the strange stuff in this chase, why they are moving so slow. Maybe they have to fight against this gravity, maybe that's why they have to adjust their weapons to compensate, and that's why their weapons get pulled down. But of course no one ever mentioned that, so it's hard to make up such an excuse. So something so big would have been mentioned. I actually wish that would have been the explanation, because that would have made this movie more of a science fiction movie. They could also add this whole time dilation thing next to a black hole, you know, like in that movie Interstellar. That part of the movie was a lot of fun, the whole next to a black hole, time moving slowly, all that stuff is really interesting. But of course, because of what we see between Kylo Ren and Rey, since they are communicating, then that cannot be the explanation, because there is no time dilation between them. They seem to be communicating in real time, and there is no delay on Kylo's part. So this explanation of a black hole beneath the fleet, I have to rule it out. So what is the explanation? Well, the simplest explanation is that this cannon simply fire some kind of missiles, basically. So these are missiles which are guiding themselves to hit the target. And this way the resistance cannot do any maneuvers, it will still hit them. Maybe that's why they not even try. They don't try to avoid this, getting hit by all of this stuff. Even in the end, when their shields are no longer effective, with the small transporters, they don't seem to be trying to do any maneuvers. So maybe it's because they know that these are basically missiles that will hit the target anyway. So I think that's the simplest explanation. These are not energy bolts, these are not lasers, they are simply guided missiles which they fire at the general direction of the range they have. They seem to be all on the top of the ship. I guess that's the most powerful weapons are there, and so they have to fire that as close as possible, because they cannot turn the ship around because they are trying to catch them with the engine, so they have to be pointed with the nose of the ship directly in front, and these cannons are above, so they cannot fire any lower than they do, and so the missiles simply target themselves to hit the target. So that's the simplest explanation, and that also might be a deliberate tactic to try to bypass the shields of the enemy, or to make it harder for the enemy to maintain shields, because we heard in some of the movies that they are able to focus the shields, let's say on the back of the ship, to make the shield stronger there, and so if the shots are all fired directly straight, they will always hit the strong part of the shield. But if they can curve the direction of their fire, then they can try to hit the ship from other angles, and that will be more effective in combat. So that might be a deliberate design of this weapon, so that they will not be able to focus shields on specific parts, and they can be hit randomly from all angles.
Concentrate, be a shield!
Another possible explanation is that maybe the First Order fleet was using a tractor beam to try to slow down the resistance, and we saw in episode 4, we saw the Death Star has a tractor beam which is invisible, and it managed to catch the Falcon from very far away, and it was all in much larger range than what we see in this movie. So the Death Star was very far away, yet it was able to catch the Falcon from afar with an invisible tractor beam, which they couldn't escape. They couldn't even go to light speed because of this tractor beam. So I wish it would have been mentioned in this movie. It would have made this whole chase scene make much more sense. It would also easily explain why they can't escape into hyperspace without this whole excuse of having too little fuel, which didn't really make much sense in this movie. I mean, the war just started and immediately they are out of fuel. They have only enough for 2 jumps. That was a bit silly. So if they simply said that they are using a tractor beam against them, that would solve that problem without that explanation. So maybe that is the case, it was simply never mentioned. Maybe it was mentioned off screen, so I guess it's possible. It would also explain how come both fleets were so slow in the end when Rey arrived and Finn arrived. They viewed this fleet from afar, and the fleet seems to be barely moving, even though supposedly they were in constant acceleration for 2 days. So that kind of bugged me, that didn't make sense. And the only way to explain it is to say that both fleets were actually not moving that fast. They were simply using tractor beams against each other. Maybe the Resistance was using a repelling beam, the opposite of a tractor beam, and the First Order was using a tractor beam, so they were slowing each other down basically. And maybe the same tractor beams also affected weapons, and so maybe that's why the weapon was being pulled down, maybe because of all these tractor beams, and that's why they had to fire it from above, and it was getting pulled down a little bit by the tractor beam, and that's why it was not in a straight line. So that's also a possible way to explain all of this. Of course, it was never mentioned, so that's a problem, but we can assume it's all part of their normal tactics, which are too advanced for us to understand or know. But all these pilots are using that all the time, and we simply don't know about it. So I guess it's a possible explanation. I actually think it's my favorite explanation because it would explain all the other problems I talked about, like Rey arriving and Finn arriving and viewing the fleet from the side, and it barely moved. So the only way I can explain that is that they were slowing each other down with some kind of technobubble explanation. And maybe that's why they were all stuck in this chase and why the First Order also didn't jump into hyperspace, which is a question I discussed in a separate video as well. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments below. Check out my other videos. I make a whole series of videos nitpicking this movie and the other movies and really discussing it, and I'm just doing it for fun. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I will see you all next time. Bye bye.